God. We believe in a God who is love, and love is relationship. And so relationship is at the center of what it means to be human. It's really part of the DNA of who we are as people. It's part of God's creation. Relationship is so fundamental, and justice is relational. We know that justice is about right relationships, and we see this, from the Hebraic words, mishpat and tzedakah, and those words come together, bringing the fullness of justice. But we have this triune God that is recreating, reconciling, and just renewing all of these broken relationships. And we see that is, we see that throughout the whole biblical narrative. Almost every story, every aspect of the Old Testament and New, we can see that God is at work in this process of reconciling broken relationships. Just one example is the story that we get from the book of Ruth. And we have Boaz, and he is informed that he has this forbidden Moabite woman working in his field, has every right and every inclination to kick her out of that field. Okay? But what we see is, what we see in this story is this incredible story of reconciliation. And sometimes we miss it, but we have Boaz, he goes and he seeks Ruth out in the field. And he goes to her and he greets her in a way that is very dignified. And here we have this forbidden Moabite, generally hated woman because of her social standing, because of her religious background, because of who she is ethnically. And then we see Boaz doing this unthinkable thing. He stoops down and he invites her in to have a meal. Invites her in to his table, and they have this meal. He showers her with more grace after the meal, leaving her with 30 to 50 pounds worth of food, about a half month's of wages. And then we see that this indeed will lead to this marriage between Boaz and Ruth, this amazing sort of reconciliation that takes place even with Ruth and Naomi. Their lives are changed forever. And we also see that this marriage results in a child that will one day lead to the quintessential kinsman redeemer, Jesus. And so here we have this story of reconciliation. We also see it throughout Christ's life and ministry, Christ's mending relationship with all the wrong kind of people, with sinners and lepers and publicans and prostitutes and Samaritans. This story of the Samaritan woman at the well is just one quick example. We have this amazing reason for all differences, gender differences, social differences, religious differences. Kind of an exchange and engagement in terms of this sort of whole thing taking place at this well that should not have taken place. And yet we have Jesus, and we see in this story that this woman looks at Jesus, and this story starts with her viewing Jesus as a Jew. And that's what he is. He's a Jew to her. And then as the story progresses, he becomes a prophet. And we see then he becomes the Messiah. And at the end of the story, he is the Savior of the world. This incredible transformation and change taking place. And so, Jesus crosses these barriers. He goes over the divides, the things that divide us, those things that we find because of religion, because of ethnicity, because of gender, because of our social status, we end up dividing each other. And he lives relationship into that. He brings an extension of his own friendship and relationship into the lives of others. And he offers this to all people. And so the real question for us as we go through this workshop today is do we do relationship in that way? Do we do relationship in the way of Jesus? Does the church do relationship in that way? Or have we continued to emphasize those things that divide us rather than those things that bring us together? And so that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. What is it that keeps us divided. And one of the things that I'm just going to mention, this is going to be such a basic sort of a thing, but I think it's really good to remind ourselves, especially together as we do this. But one simple expression of a sort of connectedness that we can have that I think is a right expression is that we refrain from jumping to conclusions about people who are different from us. We refrain from that, the idea of basing that sort of conclusion on simple sound bites, on simple cliches and stereotypes. Oftentimes things we get maybe from a 2-minute video that someone said, look at this is the way the world is. And then we draw our conclusions on that. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. But our Muslim friends and neighbors, if we really begin to give space and we really begin to understand the individual stories of those people that we begin to exchange and we begin to develop friendships with, if we actually take the time to even understand the broader narrative of their own personal story, we begin to experience them in a different way. We begin to understand who they are as people in different ways. We actually begin to understand their Islam in a different way than we've heard. And we actually, it is something that sometimes requires a lot of effort, but for the most part, from my experience, it's just a lot of fun. And it's so enriching to be able to go over that divide and to be able to become close friends, especially with those that have come to the United States as refugees who are Muslim. I have developed some really close friendships that it just is life-changing. So our failure really to create this sort of space, to create this way in which we can better understand each other, it really makes our world smaller and it makes our world less beautiful, in my opinion. It's what really contributes to the sort of social, ethnic, and religious groupings that we call the other. And it's what really is a process of dehumanization, where we reduce someone to something that actually creates an us and them. And it's what's behind the fear that we experience, it's what's behind the suspicion that we may have, and it's also what's behind the discrimination that we may systematically be part of. And I believe this happens to different groups in different places, but in particular, I really want to point out that this is happening to Muslims in America today. And I really feel like it's important for us to acknowledge that. It's not to gloss over the sort of the better impulses of who we are and the kinds of things that have happened. Victoria, Texas, about 4 months ago, a mosque was burned down to the ground, and 4 churches came forward. A synagogue came forward, immediately offering their space to these people from the mosque. And within a week, they had raised $1 million to rebuild that mosque. Amazing sort of response that they had. And so we can't forget those. But at the same time, we have to recognize that indeed there is suspicion, there is fear, and there is discrimination that's taking place. There's actually hatred. And so it's important that we recognize that as well. I know that many or some of those that have come to the United States as refugees come as Muslim. And if we look at our situation in Boise, Idaho, where we live, and we have a ministry there, if you look at all the Muslims that live in Boise, Idaho, 95% of those Muslims came as refugees. In fact, there was a census that was taken in 1950 that it produced the incredible information there's exactly 1 Muslim living in Idaho in 1950. And today there's over 12,000. Changing the whole landscape, cultural landscape. And what does the church do with this? It's something that the church is wrestling with. And in many ways, there is a need for discipleship in the sense of how we build relationship with our Muslim friends and those that have come. The Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism They said that the violent attacks against Muslims in 2015 jumped up 40% from where they were. It's the highest since 9/11. The report explicitly goes on to say this, and I'll just quote this: Muslims have been shot and killed execution style in their living rooms and outside of the mosques. They've been fatally stabbed on their way home. They have been beaten in their stores, in their schools, and on the streets. They have been kicked off of airplanes, egged outside of Walmart, scorched with hot coffee in a park, shot in cabs and punched while pushing their children in strollers. Their clothes have been set on fire and their children have been bullied. Now, this has happened to Muslims in general, but in particular, it's happened not only just to men and women, but women take the brunt, because they have these visible representations of Islam. You know, they wear a hijab or a niqab. These things are very visible, and so they end up becoming the targets of this sort of discrimination. 69% of the women who wear hijabs have reported at least one incident, one case in their lives of discrimination, at least one. And this is compared to 29% of those who have not worn the hijab. In the Netherlands, 90% of the victims of reporting incidents of violence in 2015 were women. In France, it was 81%. So we see that these numbers are not just numbers, but they're actually represent real women, real families that undergo a great deal of fear. And you can imagine what that means to people who come as refugees, as we saw this morning, and all that they go through on the refugee highway, and all the sort of you can't imagine, you know, the sort of trauma that is associated with their journey. And yet, here many that come as refugees who are Muslim still are experiencing this sort of thing. So it's important that we recognize this. I want to raise the awareness. That's one of the purposes of our time together, is to raise the awareness, but also to show how we might contribute to the problem, and also how we can be part of the solution. And so as in part of doing that, I want to just conduct a small little exercise on empathy that will kind of help us to relate.
I didn't quite expect this at the tables.
I think there's a saying that we all know that you haven't really understood someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. Huh? Oh. And I really like how Harper Lee, and the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, put it. You never really know a man until you understand things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And it's obvious we can't walk around in someone else's skin. But what can we do to try and get a better idea, a better understanding of their point of view? And so we're going to do, do you have an extra one? Okay, there's an activity that you've been given. It has, it's fine, I can do without it. I kind of wrote these that was going to have people come up and act them out, but what we're going to do instead is, in tables or group, you're going to read the scenario and then ask the question. Some of these scenarios really happened. I think of one of our favorite restaurants. A couple weeks ago, a person went outside the restaurant called the Goodness Land and wrote "refugee, go home," and did a whole bunch of slurs in front of his restaurant. And this was Boise, Idaho, which we really thought was a nice little safe community and did not have a lot of anti. So it doesn't matter if you get through all 4 scenarios. We're going to give you about 5-7 minutes to go through those. Read them as a group, and then just talk about it. Maybe somebody can be the one that asks the discussion questions.
Did she, by a group, she meant group or table? Table. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, no, I just...
Anybody want to read the scenario?
I will. Scenario 1. A lady and her 7-year-old daughter dash into the bathroom of the airport before getting on a plane. a lady looks you up, and a lady looks you up and down, and then stares at your headscarf. She says, "Go home. Go back to where they wear those things." She walks out of the bathroom. Discussion questions.
Discussion question. How does it feel to be the Muslim woman? Let's start on that one.
Shameful. Threatening.
Embarrassed, ashamed, angry.
Misunderstood.
Embarrassed in front of her daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a little fear.
A lot of fear.
Something might happen. Okay, what thoughts do you think were going through her mind?
I mean, if she was getting on, just especially around a plane, I would be extra kind of scared and cautious. And I've even traveled with friends before that won't speak in their native tongue. They're not even Muslim, but they won't speak in a Middle Eastern tongue in the airport. They don't feel safe. And she's about to get on a plane, and here someone tells her to go home.
What about the daughter? What is she thinking?
I think she must have been scared and maybe embarrassed for her mother because someone spoke badly to her.
I'm probably more shocked if she's only 7. She probably, like, little kids are more welcoming, I think. Small kids are more welcoming. They don't see all of those differences, so it's probably really shocking for her.
I'm thinking she might be thinking, what is the problem?
Yeah.
What's the big problem? So then what is the lady who is saying the mean things feeling?
Fear.
Stereotyping.
She probably feels dominant.
Stereotyping a woman because of her dress.
She feels invaded.
I'm having a hard time understanding the paragraph. Who's the lady and the 7-year-old daughter and the lady that looks you up and down? Who's who? Is the lady and the daughter the one that's questioning the...
Yeah. The lady and the daughter are the ones that are being looked at.
Okay, got it.
It's kind of confusing because it paints the scene, and then it says, okay, now you're that lady, and now it says another lady looks at you, headdress lady looks you up and down.
Articulate a little more.
Yeah, so it's a lady and a lady. I'm like, which lady's who?
Right.
I think the lady who said the bad things actually felt threatened.
Yeah.
So, but the way she expressed that threat was to threaten somebody else.
We often fear what we don't understand.
I think she felt confronted in a safe place, the ladies' restroom, right? And then here's this person with this, whatever, garb on that she's not familiar with.
I kind of wonder what comes from, like, does a woman really feel threatened by a woman, or by what she represents?
She represents.
Yeah.
All right, we're supposed to go on to scenario 2?
Yeah.
I guess
Who
so.
wants to read down?
Yeah.
I can. 3 people scenario here: a Muslim woman, a man with a lighter, and a store owner. A woman wearing a hijab is standing outside of a store downtown. She notices that there is a man to her right, behind her, and is a little uncomfortable.
It's okay if you don't get
seems
through.
far enough
Give you
away.
about 2 or 3 more, well, probably 3 to 4 more minutes of discussion, talking through this.
But he seems far enough away. All of a sudden, her right arm is getting hot, and then her blouse goes on fire. The man with a lighter quickly walks away as the store owner calls the police. What would it feel like to be that woman, and why was she targeted?
It would be terrorizing that woman.
That's oppression, class persecution for Islamic faith. I mean, it's representing your faith. I mean, why would you?
You always have to watch your back.
Unbelievably correct.
I literally did not mean to, just like felt a little shock and anger, and then just then you just are that from your past, you know,
How about the store owner as the neutral, the supposed neutral party in this, you know? Kind of caught in the middle. Almost could be framed. Look like he did it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do a little business here. And
Yeah, liability is what I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah.
As a store owner.
Yeah.
I got all this stuff going on in front of my store.
Yeah, it went on in front of his store, but the other thing that happens is people won't help. You know, I mean, he could have said, it's not my business, I'm going back inside my store. So I think that he must have had some courage to call the police.
Yeah, he did. He at least did that.
But notice he calls the police instead of going put out the fire first.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
She's on fire.
Maybe he did both.
Maybe he did
Hopefully
that.
he did both. Doesn't say.
Yeah.
I'll give you another minute.
Wonder if the store owner tried to like catch not maybe catch him, but at least catch a glimpse of him, you know, or do so many people turn a blind eye, like, well, so, you know, a woman's on fire, I need to call the police, but I'm not necessarily gonna rat out, you know, my bro who put her on fire.
I'm thinking he might also be thinking about, you know, medical first aid and covering her up again. What else?
One example of prejudice against Muslims that was difficult for me to
Okay, let's
forgive.
wrap up and
My husband and
redirect
I
back
lived
up
in
here.
England. Our neighbor and our landlords were Sikh, and a number of Sikh
So the first two
women
scenarios were real scenarios, ones that I got off
and a
of
beard.
papers or things like that. Those things actually happened.
One was
The second two were ones that I made up, especially being a teacher. I know what kids can say and what they can do. And I love somebody was saying, what age do kids start learning empathy? And
Which they start
some really
learning
good
racism.
discussions going on there. But how did these scenarios make you feel? Disgusted?
Unfortunately, they just sounded kind of normal.
Yeah.
It's
They
almost
happen.
normalized.
Any other thoughts or feelings? Yeah, I was telling you about the restaurant owner. Actually, that week there were two other crimes against refugees. 2 cars were keyed and vandalized, all within that same week in Boise. And so it's just kind of made that icky feeling in our stomach being there. What can we do? I loved that was one of the things. What would you do if you were a bystander at this? I love that you asked that question in your group, and I don't know if it came up in any of the other groups. In these scenarios, as you put yourself there, maybe not as the Muslim woman or man or a person doing that, but what would you do if you were standing there and you saw that? What can we do?
Most people would think that they would do something.
Yeah.
See it all the time here.
Yeah.
At 7-Elevens.
Okay.
Have people speak to the guys in the counter. It's just absolutely disgusting, and unfortunately, she keeps getting it. So I constantly have to explain to her why that's wrong.
Okay. Yeah. It's heartbreaking as you're raising your kids here.
We could ask the Holy Spirit what to do, and then act on what he shows us to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the differences is we do have the Lord to lean into and say, what would you have us do? What can we do? Do we step into this? Do we call 911? Any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, God has been teaching me in the last 6 months. You don't have to do a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We think that we have to do something spectacular. All you've got to do is tell someone, I'm sorry, I love you.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have to be spectacular.
Yeah. I mean, yesterday Nick and I were flying here from Idaho, and the gal that was getting off the plane, I think we started in the last 2 minutes as we're taxiing to talk. And she was not Muslim or anything, but in that little bit of time, I said, oh, you're going to LA, I hope you're fine, you're going to get to go to the beach. And she said, no, my dad is going through his 2nd round of chemotherapy, and started crying. And I thought, what do? I don't have to do anything spectacular. I did put my hand on her, and I just said, I'm really sorry, and I will be praying. But it just reminded me of that. I think at times we can, if we were in that bathroom in that first scenario, can we go up to that woman, put our hand on her back, and just say, I'm sorry. That is not how we all feel. And I've seen that time and time again when people step into that and do that. A lot of what Nick's going to be talking about is how do we build understanding with people who we feel are the enemy. And sometimes we feel like that child that says, no, I don't want to pick him. For me, that's the enemy more than the Muslim child. But there's a lot of people, do you understand what I meant by that? A lot of people here in the United States feel that Muslims are the enemy. And what can we do to build understanding, to build bridges between that community? So I'll let you keep going.
Great. Well, thank you for participating in that. I hope it was helpful. One of the reasons that we do end up stereotyping people is we think we have people figured out pretty quickly. And I think as you get older and you begin to understand someone's story in a deeper way, you begin to understand that that's really not true, that it does require a sort of engagement and a sort of relationship building to begin to really understand who people are. One of the common stereotypes that Muslims have, or at least from Muslim friends that I've had that they've talked about, is that they're depicted as someone who is either violent or is potentially violent and could be a powder keg ready to burst any time. And here these people are some of the kindest, most nonviolent people that I know. And so, we tend to see people sometimes, even there could be even people within this room that may not know a Muslim. I don't know. And sometimes it's because of our own demographic, our own situation, we may not have opportunity. But the fact is that sometimes the only thing that gives us a window into someone else's life is the media. And that's what happens oftentimes when we think about a Muslim or Islam, is that we see that small media window, and that's the single story that we have, and we'll talk about that. And so, the media has this penchant for the conflict narrative. If it bleeds, if it bleeds, it's going to lead. And one study that I read actually took 600 different news items from 15 different national media outlets, and they concluded this way. They said that the news coverage from all of this study, it was a 50-page study, they said the conclusion they drew was the news coverage frames all Muslims as monolithic, homogeneous group of potential extremists rather than as a complex individuals living in diverse communities that have nothing to do with the organized, politicized violence wielded by groups like ISIS and Boko Haram. And so, as you can imagine that this can be really frustrating to a lot of my Muslim friends, but I wanted to show a quick little video vignette from Mas Jobrani. He's a Muslim comedian, and he expresses his frustration like this.
Can you hit the lights?
No, man, it is. It's cool though, you know. But like, and the thing that frustrates me is when I see us on TV nowadays. Who do they always show? They always show the crazy dude burning the American flag, going, "Death to America!" Always that guy. Just once, I wish they would show us doing something good, man. Right? Just once, right? Yeah, man. Right? Show us doing something good, like, you know, like baking a cookie or something, right? Because I've been to Iran, we have cookies. Just once, I want CNN to be like, now we're going to go to Muhammad in Iran. They go to some guys like, hello, I'm Muhammad, and I'm just baking a cookie. No bombs, no flags, nothing. Back to you, Bob. They're never going to do that. Even if they ever did that, they'd follow it up with another news piece. They'd be like, this just in, a cookie bomb just exploded. Oh man, you sneaky bears, man.
You know, this is a very deep and wide topic when we begin to talk about Islam and begin to talk about our Muslim friends. And so, you know, this workshop isn't designed for deeper discussions into that particular topic. But the point that I would really want to make in this workshop is that we do walk into this room with a certain sort of preconceived notions and certain biases and certain stereotypes. It's just because we have limited experience, and that's just kind of the reality of what you know, we come into the room with. But how is it that we can help to overcome some of those stereotypes and some of those biases, and how can we build a sense of empathy, like we just talked about, and a sense of understanding? That really becomes kind of the heart of what I really want to get at. And I'm just going to mention a couple of things that I think are critical aspects of developing empathy and understanding for other people who are different than us. And the first is just talking about ethnocentricity. You know, ethnocentricity is basically this human tendency that we have to actually we have a lens that's self-referential. It sees the world according to our own needs, according to our own ways, according to our own culture, our own patterns of thought, our own language, food, and dress, our own ways of knowing things. So, you know, ethnocentricity really becomes a way in which we distort others, because we see things only through that lens. And so it becomes very important to be able to recognize this human tendency that we have, and to kind of bring ourselves out of the middle of that circle. And when we do that, we become part of the circle. It's not like we're giving up our identity, we're not giving up who we are, but what we're able to do is we're able to appreciate and to celebrate and to actually encounter other people in a deeper way, because we're in that circle with them. This is not multiculturalism. There's still room for critique of other cultures. There's still room for evaluation. But the fact is that we need to recognize the tendency of ethnocentricity, because it really does create barriers and walls to really getting to know other people. So this is the first step in creating empathy and understanding. The second step of doing this, building empathy and understanding, is to not rely on a single story. And I want to go deeper into what I mean by this, but we're going to show this in a little clip from a TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie, who's a Nigerian author and storyteller. And before you see this clip, I want to just kind of give a little bit of a background. She grew up in Nigeria as a child, and she said her only exposure to books were books from American and British authors. And she says she developed a kind of single story of what books had to be, because the characters in the books that she read, the characters were white and they were blue-eyed, and they ate apples, and they played in the snow, and they talked about the weather a lot, how nice it is to have the sun come out today. And so she says, well, here she is. She's never been outside of Nigeria, and despite this fact, you know, she's never played in the snow. She's never eaten any apples in her life, and she's never talked about the weather, because there's no need to talk about the weather in Nigeria. You know, Chimamanda goes on to say that it really demonstrates this impressionability that we have to a story, especially for children. And then she goes on to quote, she says, because the only books that I had ever read all had foreign characters in them, I had become convinced that all books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and be about things that I had never experienced or could personally relate to. Things changed when I discovered books written by African authors. I went through this mental shift in my perception of what books were. I realized that people like me, girls with the skin color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not be put into a ponytail, could also be characters in books. Now, she said, I love the American and English books that I've read. They've stirred my imagination, opened me up to new worlds. But the unintended consequences of this single story experience was that I did not know people like me could be in literature. So when I discovered African books, she says, that saved me from the single story of what books were. And so that gives you a little bit of background of what she means, and then she goes on in this experience to explain
To add that I too am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And, as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story.
So I want to take that as kind of a backdrop to a question. I guess the first, this is the next. Okay. Let me just explain this graph real quickly. It just is a survey that was taken by the Pew Research Institute or Center. And the characteristics associated with Westerners and Muslims, traits associated with Westerners among Muslims. And so what you see here is these sorts of stereotypes that are on the part of Muslims. And I experienced this. In fact, oh, you're a Christian from America, so you are immoral, and you have all sorts of things associated with the only window that they had was the media and TV and various things that they saw from soap operas and whatever. And so it was kind of like that was the association to my following Jesus was, oh, that's, you're following that which is immoral. So selfish and violent and immoral and that sort of thing. Same thing as we see with Muslims. with our association with Muslims, fanatical and that sort of thing. Some positive things as well, but what we see is that we have these sorts of impressions that we take of each other, and that we have to be careful in that regard. So how do we cultivate a counter-narrative? How do we actually begin to care and develop empathy and understanding of others? A counter-narrative to the ethnocentricity as well as the reliance on a single story, and how we shape our understanding of someone. How is it that we create that counter-narrative? And so that's what I'd like to just have a kind of a quick brainstorm as to ideas as to how it is that we can move forward, in a sense. If we all walk into this room with certain biases and stereotypes, how is it that we can move forward, and what are some things that we might be able to do individually as well as corporately to overcome some of this?
Yeah. I think with a single story is just, a lot of people, they've only been taught or learned one story. So I think awareness and education is a huge part of this. Because a lot of people don't know, or who may not know a Muslim or never encountered someone. And so they just assume what they see on TV is, that's how every Muslim is. And so I think to share that in our churches, in our ministries, to as many people as you can, and highlight, the true nature of those relationships that you have experienced.
Right, it humanizes someone. Yeah, you really begin to see who they are. And it takes work. Sometimes it's not, to observe and to listen and to really understand the histories and the deeper stories, the broader narratives of the single stories. It takes work. So good, thank you. Any other ideas you have?
Personal experience, because I think a lot of times people will say, oh, I saw on the news, or give you statistics, and all you can say is like, well, in my experience, and no one can refute your experience.
Yeah, so good.
Sometimes I have to remind myself that God loves them as much as He loves me. They're a child of God. They just don't know Him yet.
Yeah, that's right. That's common to our humanity, right? They're created in God's image. And we're in need of God just as much as they are, and it's important to come from that.
I think even sharing stories about Muslim friends that we've either heard about or we personally know who've had experiences where Jesus appeared to them, and eventually they became Christians, or even became Christians right on the spot. I think that tells a lot right there.
Thank you.
It's related to what the lady shared in the video, giving different people from different backgrounds the platform to share. Even working with and among refugees, a lot of times it's non-refugees who are telling the story about refugees.
Yeah.
Is actually like, we need to give them a platform.
Yeah.
A voice.
Yeah. Get some good media going on. Somehow figure out how to share this media on television, in the movies, at your church, and couple it with the education that he was talking about.
Right. Very good point. Yeah. There's so many talented people with regard to the arts and using media and that sort of thing to really express someone's story can be powerful.
But and then just tag teaming off of that, just remembering that our relationships, like in that they're not our stories to share, to be really mindful of if people want their stories shared or not, because as soon as we take their stories and write about them without permission or put it on media, they may look like a project, and the platform and the story is almost dehumanized that way. And
I think there are a lot of nice resources out there that you can read that tell you what some of the values are that people from Muslim countries have. And if you read, you'll find that there's a lot of overlap. So if you can find some things that we as Christians believe and that they also believe, then that's a good way. And the example that always comes to me as a woman is dressing modestly. That's something that Christian women do. It's something that Christian people think is respectful, and that's something that really resonates to them. And if you can do that and try to promote that when you come into contact with them, it goes a long way.
Thank you.
And sometimes Muslims do things a lot better than we do, such as hospitality.
Yeah.
What's the shame? Oh boy.
Are you from the South? Because if you're saying that, then cause we know the South, this hospitality is way better than our Idaho hospitality.
Just becoming, having those awkward conversations perhaps with your Muslim friends about, what do you think, what could I be doing better, what am I doing wrong, I'm always afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. What would be some things that you'd like to share with me about how I could do things better, and what kinds of questions would you have for me about Christian culture or American culture that might help you to understand? So just being vulnerable and not starting off a conversation the way we always do, like what's your name, what do you do for work, where you come from. That doesn't really, that boxes people into who, that's how we want to see people, instead of asking them, what are you finding about this country that you like, or what's been difficult for you? Really getting into it, building relationship, finding out who they are.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think a good way to do that is by going to the mosques with them. It opens them up because they're seeing that you're wanting to explore an identity of them, and that opens them up to want to learn about your faith and about how you worship God. So really interesting how by taking a motivation to go to the mosque with my Muslim friends, they came out saying, hey, I want to go to church with you on Sunday because I want to learn how you worship your God.
Thanks, David. Yeah, that actually just happened to me this last week, where, can we come to your church as well? So.
I've got a friend that does a weekly email called Muslim Connect, and one of the things I really like about it is that every week he throws out a very small step that any Christian could take to not try to revolutionize their worldview and their approach, but just to make small incremental steps towards becoming more sensitive to these issues.
Very good, very good.
Shane Bennett?
Just a great question that I like piggybacking off of somebody else is to say, if I'm in the States as a majority culture person, what is it that you wish people like me knew about people like you? Or what is one strength about your culture that you think Americans don't understand? And then using every opportunity I have to share that with everybody else. I was in this conversation with someone the other day, and they said, the thing that they think their culture is strong in is this. Have you ever thought about that? It just kind of gives me something to use amplify their voice,
I would just say humility, because the average, look at my next door neighbor, some of the attitudes that you hear is kind of shocking. You think it's probably a lot more prevalent than any of us would like to admit, but people thinking we're in America, we have all the answers, we're the best, and everyone else is all the problems. We drive on the right side, and we drive on the wrong side.
Right, it's not the left side, it's the wrong side.
Yeah, I call it umbilicus una, which is I'm the belly button of the world. I'm right, and everybody else is.
Yeah, that's the ethnocentrism.
The belly button. If we go in as learners, and when we spend time with people of another culture, another language, another anything, understand that we should be asking questions, not I'm the answer man with all my education from Harvard or whatever, Humility, I think, is really key.
Yeah, I've often thought of Philippians 2 as really the basis for mission, the starting point of mission. This kenosis, we empty ourselves in humility and allow others to come into that space. So, good.
I would encourage you to find somewhere that we also work with an organization called Peace Catalyst, and we do peace feasts, and where we bring Christians and Muslims together to share a meal together, and that's been a really rewarding time. And we try to ask people who maybe have not been exposed to meeting very many Muslims to come to that, and we work with our local Islamic center. and we do them at a halal restaurant, and those have been great opportunities. And so I would encourage you to look around the cities that you're from and see if either PCI is there or there's other organizations that are doing that as well.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for those thoughts. Those are really, really good. I was really blessed by just that conversation. I guess in summary, the fear and suspicion, discrimination, even maybe the hatred that is directed towards Muslims. We see that we're more apt to fall into those things when we are blinded by our own ethnocentricity, when we're relying on a single story. That's when we tend to go towards those sorts of walls of discrimination and hate. As Chimamanda said in that video, she said, when you show people as one thing and one thing only, over and over and over again, that's what they become. And so it really is so important that we take the time to give space to learn about someone's story and to have more than one source, more than one story. A practical starting point of this and becoming part of the solution is to actually meet a Muslim. And so I want to just show this cute little video that will help us encourage to do that.
So when I say the word Muslim, what does that make you think? Outsider.
Every Muslim is a terrorist.
Well, you should try Muslim. It's a new service that will cure your fear of Muslims in one easy step. Meeting one. Hey.
Oh my God! Hi,
Hi.
Muhammad, I presume?
No, I'm Ben.
Meeting a Muslim.
Hi. What are we gonna do? We're gonna build a bomb together?
What? No, I would never build a bomb. I work in retail.
I work in retail. This is insane. Too good to be true. I gotta pat you down. I'm gonna have to do it. I'm sorry.
No.
This is crazy. Not only does Ahmed live in an apartment just like me, he also watches Netflix just like me. And he loves soup just like me. And he even said he stays in bed all day sometimes, just like me.
Yeah, I slept till noon this Sunday. It's great.
Am I being punked?
No, you're just meeting a fellow human.
The craziest part is we still haven't bonded over the thing I know we both love. Armor-piercing automatic weapons.
Oh, no. I'm an ardent gun control advocate.
You just keep surprising me.
Honey, you won't believe it. I'm standing here with a white Muslim.
Wow.
That's great.
Like everything about him.
We don't sleep under the same moon.
This has been so truly amazing. Pick up things tomorrow. See if the connection's still there. Huh?
No, I'm good.
Say anything?
Yeah.
Man, I'm so glad I met this Muslim.
Muslim means because Muslims are a diverse group of 1.6 billion people, and we're just asking you to be rational.
So I hope you found it cute. I don't want you to emulate that particular approach, but yeah, so interesting. So this next graph, I just wanted to point out this positive correlation that we see in this particular survey of I don't know any Muslims, and how the gold bar is about the favorable impression that you have of Muslims. So I know some very well. So the more you know a Muslim, the more the favorable impression. So, I mean, I think this is actually a demographic for Democrats. Now, Republicans, the numbers shrink, but the correlation, the positive correlation is still there. The point is that as you begin to know someone, you have an opportunity to have a favorable impression. So, I hope that works. I wasn't being political at all. So I want to actually end with another video that I think will help us to kind of be courageous and not get awkward with it. And this is I just found this video kind of.
You just discovered Kid President.
Yeah, I just discovered. Yeah.
Here's the thing: the world needs more friends. I don't know what to say, but get awkward with it. Yeah, get awkward with it, people. Got stuff with my friend game.
What's your name?
Donna.
Cool. My name's Robbie. Nice to meet you. How old are you? 14. Cool. I'm 12. I'm just I'm just saying. I'm just saying the question and you say it. Why are you wearing a scarf on your head?
It's because I'm Muslim and my religion tells me to, but it was also my choice.
Do you ever think you're different because you're Muslim?
Yeah, recently I do feel like I'm a little different than everybody because I'm Muslim, because I recently started wearing the scarf and the hijab, and so that kind of made me stand out a little bit more, but it's not always a bad thing. I like being different. Do you ever feel different?
Yeah, for sure. Several things. Osteogenesis imperfecta in general. OI, it causes dwarfism, so everyone's like a little bit taller than me. When we played like a sport like dodgeball in school, I was always the last one to get picked on the team because I was always in and out of a wheelchair. Most of the time I was in a wheelchair playing dodgeball. It was fun, but I was always the last one to get picked, so that made me feel a little bit different. So I'm not a Muslim, but does that mean we can't be friends still?
No, of course it doesn't. I have tons of friends that aren't Muslim. My religion doesn't define whether we can be friends or not.
Finish the sentence. So what would be more awesome
if everybody learned to accept each other, even if they're different from each other.
So it's time to make some new friends. Quit the judging and get to talking, because awkward is the new awesome. Yeah. So who can you make friends with today? Get awkward with it, people.
So yeah, I hope that's a little encouraging. So, any final comments? You know, the whole point of this is not only to bring up the awareness of what Muslims are going through in America, but also that we understand some of the ways that we contribute to the problem, as well as the ways that we can contribute to the solution, and really do relationship more in the way of Jesus, and to really treat our Muslim friends in a way that is dignified, in a way that's respectful, in a way that really reflects the fact that God made them in His image, and that they're first and foremost human beings that God loves and cares for. So, any last comments before we end? We've got 3 minutes.
I have just a thought that I've been thinking of lately is, I get why America fears them. I get it. The thing that puzzles me constantly is why the church would be here. I find that Americans have actually kind of moved past the fearfulness in many ways. Not as a kind of a big rush statement. Where I'm finding the most prejudice is when I speak in churches. And that's the part that puzzles me the most. Is when I fight the prejudice. I feel like I'm in a battle of trying to change. The struggle is trying to change the opinion within the church. So we're creating dialogue in my inner circle of trying to figure ways of addressing this within the church, because America really is moving a little bit beyond even where the church has kind of lagged in this area.
Yeah. Well, good. That's a good way to move forward, is to create that dialogue and understanding. Thank you. Any other comments before we? Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about the halal peace feast that somebody's done. If I could just hear a story about.
Yeah, we actually have some materials on how the logistics of it, but really it's just based on the idea that you can have people that you know from the mosque invited, and you can allow for an open forum where you just say, here's the restaurant. And you arrange it with the restaurant, of course, first, and you have space there, and you have an open invitation where Muslims and Christians can come, or you can do it by invitation, to where, especially the first one, it might be good to do that where you know people, and there's can be some constructive.
What is the website for PCI?
PCI.org.
Peace Catalyst.
.net.
We're glad David's here.
David is actually with Peace Catalyst International, and so we are as well, and we're one of the partners with Peace Catalyst, and so we just met David today, so that's kind of neat that we'll actually see him later in San Diego.
It's really, if you have somebody from the mosque or that's a key person to work with, then they kind of invite their side friends from the mosque, and then we invite however many, it's like 10 and 10 or something like that. We found we do big ones too. We call our Thanksgiving meal that we do with all our refugee friends and partners, but we also do invite the mosque as well, and that one's a lot bigger, our Thanksgiving Peace Feast. But the little ones are really where the dialogue happens. And some of the other things that Peace Catalyst does, some of the people do monthly dinners that they are assigned to a couple of different families, meet up with Muslim and Christian families, and they meet monthly to do that kind of thing. I'm trying to think, what does he call those?
Love Your Neighbor dinners?
Yeah, I'll have to, anyways, it's all on.
Listening communities or something.
Listening communities, maybe that's it.
Question, so you meet a new Muslim family, couple, somebody, what's your first 3 questions you might ask them just to
You know, one of the questions that I often ask is which mosque do you worship at, and where is it? And then I begin to talk about their connection to the mosque. Sometimes they don't have a connection, but then that leads into other things. So yeah, they'll tell us a story about why they don't or whatever. So that's one of the questions. I usually try to always ask about them personally, about their work and their family, and that sort of thing. But definitely stay away from the idea of telling their story if they are a refugee. Yeah, so that's pretty obvious, but yeah, not to bring up anything that would bring up trauma.
I have a question based on your years of experience. How do you, on a practical level, separate your love for people of Islamic background and culture from having that be perceived as you're embracing their belief system?
Yeah. You know, I try not to be concerned about that. What I really feel like it's important to be faithful to what Jesus has called me to, and to be faithful to Him. And I know that there are going to be people that see me in the wrong way, and they'll come to conclusions before asking me about that. So it's like living with that. It's I will be misunderstood, but I'm doing what I feel like I need to do because that's what Jesus has called
But I
me.
think
Misunderstood by other Christians or misunderstood by the Muslims?
The Christians.
By the Christians, yeah.
I'm not so concerned about that, but I mean, if the Muslims actually think that you're embracing Islam.
Oh. I've never experienced that.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
some other people have. I've been to the mosque many times, and they clearly see me as someone who's interested in learning. And I've told them that. You know, I've told them I'm not a Muslim and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we're very upfront that we are believers. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I've got a lot of Syrian friends, and I find that they're very devout, and they want to talk about their faith, and they want to find that common ground and create this. They're very quick to create, in my friends at least, create a scenario where we both believe the same thing. And I'm very clear with. I'm just very bold and I say, look, Muhammad.
There's a lot of Ben.
He's a real guy. I got a picture of him. I've had a conversation with him and said, look, we don't believe the same thing. You talk about Jesus, but it's not the same Jesus that I believe. So I love our relationship, but I want to be clear in that we're not the same. Our faiths are not the same. And he doesn't have a problem with that. And as we clarified that, it's given me more of a platform to be able to talk to him. So, he'll say something about Jesus, and then, from his understanding from what the Quran teaches or something, I say, well, that's not what Jesus said about himself. You want to know what Jesus said about himself? And so I think you just have to be really bold and not just.
There's a good book that I just read by Carl Medeiros called Speaking of Jesus. I particularly like it. Some people don't. Speaking of Jesus, the Art of Non-Evangelism. And it really, I think, is a powerful way of talking about Jesus and starting off with some of those things that begin, they're not polemic, but they really are who Jesus is about, and the whole discussion is about Jesus. But I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't go into some of those deeper questions about nature of Christ and that sort of thing. But his real idea there is we don't go into theology first. We talk about Jesus first and make Jesus the center.
Do that
of our
with your
conversation.
American friends?
Yeah.
Yeah.
friendship first. Then.
Another great book, Creating God's Space by Dr. Pollock.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just in general.
Yeah.
Creating the space like
That's
you
a
talked
really good
earlier.
Thank you.
I was wondering if there is any place where there's some kind of ongoing opportunity to intermingle with refugees. I don't know. Is there any like a
Jordan.
No, here in Dallas area.
I don't think someone else would have to
Dallas
answer
people would
that
have
question.
Vickery Meadows.
Slack.
Do you know where Vickery Meadows is? There are two guys here. They have a ministry called Forefront. It looks like a big water buffalo or something. They live in Vickery Meadows. It's several square miles of just apartments, and they live in the apartments with the refugees.
Okay.
I'll get in touch with them.
Great.
And get on Slack. Emily just said that. Slack, ask that.
That's good idea.
Yeah. Kyle and Stephen. Kyle and Stephen.
Okay.
Who asked that question?
Right there.
You're texting it.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can get with you, there's also it's called the Northwest Community Center, which is at 5750 Vineland, which is about, it's 15,000 square feet in an office building that is specifically for outreach to refugees.
Well, let me close our time in prayer. Lord Jesus, we just we thank you for your presence with us. We do, Lord, want to follow you. We want to share you with our Muslim friends because we know that you are the good news and you bring life and you bring wholeness to our relationships. You are the reason that we have salvation, and we pray, Lord, that you will use us in any way that you would desire, that we would be open, courageous. By the power of your Holy Spirit, we would have wisdom and courage, Lord, to step forward and to get awkward with it. Amen.
There was a you also. If you wanted a copy of the PowerPoint slides, this is that sheet that you need to sign on.